The plane, just after taking off for Florida in perfect weather, suddenly plummeted to the ground. Investigators now saying one of the engines apparently failed. Along with 8 passengers, Aaliyah, a young Brooklyn native and a talented singer and actress.
August 25, 2001 began as a day of celebration on Abaco Island in the Bahamas. Aaliyah Dana Houghton, a 22-year-old R&B star on the rise, had just wrapped filming for her music video Rock the Boat on her self-titled album Aaliyah. Her record label was eager to get her back home in order to continue the momentum of her meteoric rise to stardom on the back of her massively successful double platinum album Age Ain't Nothing But a Number. But cocaine, criminal activity, and an unqualified pilot were hidden dangers in the path Aaliyah and her companions had been steered onto. A fatal path, one that would claim 9 lives in seconds. A path Aaliyah may not have ventured down willingly. Breaking the law of patience. Aaliyah and her crew had just spent 4 glorious days filming on Abaco Island. What would turn out to be her final album had just come out that summer and included the hit song they were filming the video for. Aaliyah's second album, Age Ain't Nothing But a Number, had sold 6 million copies worldwide and was certified double platinum in the USA. To maximize the success of the follow-up album, having finished filming early, the label booked a charter flight so Aaliyah and her entourage could return right away. The schedule originally had the whole group leaving the island the next day, but they had canceled the smaller entourage's original tickets at the last minute. The team chartered a twin-engine Cessna 402B aircraft from a company called Black Hawk International Airways for the short 45-minute flight home. The group was used to flying in much larger aircraft, but the small plane hired to take them home was the only one available, due to their original aircraft being unavailable on such short notice. This last-minute decision meant the tiny aircraft's limits were about to be pushed to the breaking point even before the pilot climbed into his seat. Breaking the law of gravity. Cessna Aircraft Industries designed and built the C-402B twin-engined aircraft to operate at a maximum takeoff weight of 7,000 pounds. Investigators later confirmed that the group's insistence on taking everything with them meant the airplane may have been critically overloaded by almost 1,000 pounds. On a Boeing B-747 passenger jet, this would be the equivalent of loading an extra 400 passengers and their bags. This is a massive amount of extra weight for such a small airplane. To make matters worse, there were 9 people on board that day, including the pilot. The Cessna 402 is only certified to carry a maximum of 8 people, which should have been even fewer with all that heavy baggage and cargo loaded. The aircraft was diabolically overloaded, but where the cargo was placed made it even more dangerous. All the heavy video equipment had been loaded into the tail of the aircraft, behind the passengers, pushing the balance point of the plane dangerously to the rear. The plane's flight controls are designed to work properly only when the cargo and passengers are properly balanced inside the cabin. When an airplane is too tail-heavy, its handling becomes completely unpredictable. Investigators found that the plane's balance point was far aft of the furthest point legally allowed for safe flying. A common phrase used by pilots is, "An aircraft operating outside its limits only flies once." Breaking the law of common sense. The danger was so obvious to bystanders on the ground that they tried to stop the flight. Witnesses at the airport, including baggage handlers and customs officials, raised serious concerns about the huge amount of gear and the number of people trying to fit onto the small plane. Another aviator, Lewis Key, later claimed he witnessed the passengers arguing with the pilot right before takeoff. The pilot reportedly warned the group that there was simply too much weight for a safe flight, but despite his dire reservations, due to the pressure from the group, he chose to continue loading the aircraft. Investigators also found no evidence that the pilot had performed a weight and balance calculation, a critical pre-flight safety check required by law for every flight. By ignoring the basic rules of physics and being in too much of a hurry to carry out this last chance calculation, an impossible situation had been created. The pilot, who made the final decision to attempt to fly the aircraft in such a deadly state, also had a chain of personal failures that were just as ominous as the critically overloaded plane. breaking the law of personal choice. This is where the story gets even darker. A Bahamian man named Kingsley Russell, who was 13 at the time, came forward years later with a disturbing claim. He alleged that after Aaliyah saw the small plane and refused to board, she was given a pill for a headache, fell into a deep sleep, and was carried onto the plane while unconscious. This explosive allegation, which comes from a single uncorroborated witness, has never been officially verified, but it has fueled a narrative of coercion. Could Aaliyah have been put on that plane without her consent? As the unconscious singer was brought onto the Cessna, witnesses noted another fatal mistake that sealed the plane's fate. Aaliyah's bodyguard, Scott Gallen, and another crew member, each weighing about 300 pounds, were seated in the very rear of the aircraft. This seating arrangement locked in the worst possible combination. It worsened the already deadly tail-heavy balance, making the aircraft's crash almost certain upon liftoff. With the rising star passed out from a sedative, the inexperienced pilot in over his head, and the aircraft overloaded, the stage was set for disaster. Breaking actual laws. The man sitting in the cockpit was Luis Morales III, an employee of Black Hawk International Airways. Official records show that Morales should never have been flying that plane. Federal Aviation Authority, FAA records reveal that Black Hawk was authorized to use the Cessna 402B for charter flights with only one specifically named pilot, and that authorized pilot was not Luis Morales III. In fact, the day of the crash was reportedly Luis's first official day working for Black Hawk. To get the job, Morales had lied about his experience. He had falsified his pilot logbook, reporting up to 1,000 extra hours of flight time he had never actually flown, in order to make himself appear more qualified. This meant he was operating a commercial flight with far less skill, knowledge, and experience than he claimed to have. If his lack of experience wasn't worrying enough, Morales had a dark, recent legal history. Just days before the crash, he'd been sentenced to 3 years probation on a felony charge for cocaine possession. He was charged for driving with a suspended driver's license and attempting to sell stolen aircraft parts. FAA regulations require pilots to report convictions like these within 60 days, but only 12 days had elapsed since he'd pleaded no contest to all the charges. The federal courts have no rules requiring them to report convictions to the FAA. And Morales had made a deal with the judge that as long as he was gainfully employed, the courts would not report this incident to his employer. The man in charge of 8 lives plus his own had a troubled, illegal, and dishonest past that compromised every decision he made on that runway. The final atonement for broken laws. The pilot's personal issues help us understand why he ignored every clear safety warning. After the disaster, an autopsy performed on Luis Morales III's body revealed traces of cocaine metabolites in his urine and alcohol in his stomach. Investigators could not determine how significantly the drugs and alcohol affected Morales' ability to perform his duties that evening. However, being under the influence of drugs or alcohol, combined with the pressure of unauthorized flying and his low experience level, provides very compelling evidence as to why he would ignore clear warnings about the plane's impossible condition. The final safety measure, the pilot's sound judgment, was completely compromised. Not only was the aircraft illegal to fly due to its weight, but the pilot himself was unauthorized and unfit for the job. His employer and the FAA had no idea just how ill-suited Morales was to be flying that aircraft. How could anyone allow this dangerous machine to move down the runway? The one moment of hope. At about 6:45 p.m. on August 25, 2001, the small Cessna 402B began its takeoff roll down the main runway at Marsh Harbor Airport, Bahamas. Due to the massively overloaded and extremely tail-heavy condition, the pilot struggled to control the plane as it gained speed. Witnesses watched as the plane lifted off the ground. The moment it was airborne, all hell broke loose. The aircraft's nose pitched up sharply and far too steeply. The aircraft was completely uncontrollable with such an impossible load, and it immediately lost airspeed, a condition called wing stall. With no wind passing over the wing, the aircraft dropped violently, and the fully fueled plane, passengers, and crew plunged into a marshy area, making it no more than 200 feet past the end of the runway, erupting into a ball of flames. The impact was cataclysmically violent. All 9 people on board, Aaliyah, 7 members of her entourage, and the unauthorized pilot, were killed. The pathologist who examined the bodies later testified that Aaliyah's cause of death was severe burns and a fatal blow to the head. The flight lasted only a few seconds. Grim reality confirming that the plane was impossible to fly safely and everyone's fate on board had been sealed the moment the engine spooled up to start the takeoff roll. The fallout. The news of the tragedy sent shockwaves across the globe. Aaliyah's warmth and personality had made her a beloved friend and colleague of many established stars in the industry. Missy Elliott and Timbaland, whom she collaborated with on the album, spoke openly about their deep grief. Timbaland saying that he lost half his creativity upon her death. Damon Dash, in a relationship with Aaliyah at the time of her passing, has spoken about their deep connection and the plans they had for the future. Many of the dancers and crew who had remained on the island were too traumatized to fly commercially. Musician and friend Lenny Kravitz stepped in, sending his private jet to transport the remaining cast members back home safely. Unsettling questions. The formal investigation, led by Bahamian authorities and assisted by the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board, confirmed the numerous fatal errors made by the pilot and uncovered the systemic failures that allowed such a deeply troubled person and completely unqualified aviator to be in control of an aircraft he was not licensed nor trained on. They concluded the tragedy had been caused by a combination of an overloaded plane, improper balance, a pilot who was not authorized to fly for the company, and insufficient company oversight. Following the revelations of the crash and the pilot's history, the FAA permanently shut down Black Hawk International Airways. Aaliyah's parents later filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Black Hawk, the plane's owners, and the flight broker, settling the case out of court for an undisclosed amount. This terrible ending proved that the tragedy was not a random accident, but the entirely predictable end result of an illegal operation built on one dangerous failure after another. Some laws just can't be broken. Conspiracy theories. Online, lingering questions have exploded into a tangled web of conspiracy theories. Their endurance shows how desperate some are for an explanation of this senseless tragedy. So, what is the truth about Aaliyah's final day? Was her death a straightforward, though devastating, accident caused by gross negligence? The official investigation leaves little doubt about the technical causes: an overloaded plane and an unfit pilot. But more than 2 decades later, the why continues to haunt us. Why was an unqualified pilot in that cockpit? Why was the plane allowed to attempt takeoff while so dangerously overloaded? And why was a young star at the peak of her life and career placed in such a perilous situation? The technical case may be closed, but the moral and emotional questions remain. Aaliyah was one in a million, and her influence is undeniable. The full story of the choices that led to her death will likely forever remain unknown, leaving us with only her music, her memory, and a heartbreaking mystery. What do you think happened? Was it a tragic accident, or were there other forces at play? Share your thoughts in the comments. And for more deep dives into the stories you only think you know, make sure to subscribe.